Speaking of annoying people on the internet, you got to explain to me this drama. Okay, so what is this guy that said, imagine losing to Jira, but boasting that you have a couple $1 million per year? So this had to do with this almost now a meme decision to leave the cloud. DHH left the cloud. I think that's literally a meme, but it's also a fascinating decision. Can you talk to the full saga of DHH leaves the cloud?
Yes.
Leaving AWS, saving money. And I guess the case this person is making now
is that we wasted our time optimizing a business that could have been 100 times bigger if we'd just gone for the moon.
And for the moon includes
venture capital,
but also
other things, includes not caring about cost.
But also because AGI is around the corner, you should have been investing into AI, right? Is this just part of
sort of tangentially? I think it's a bit of a muddy argument. But if we just take it at its peak ideal, which I actually think is a reasonable point, is that you can get myopically focused on counting pennies when you should be focused on getting pounds, right?
Yeah.
That I've optimized our spend on infrastructure by getting out of the cloud, and that took some time, and I could have taken that time and spent it on making more features that would have attracted more customers or spend even more time with AI or done other things. Opportunity cost is real. I'm not denying that. I'm pushing back on the idea that for a company of our size, saving $2 million a year on our infrastructure bill, which is about somewhere between half to 2/3, goes directly to the bottom line, which means it's returned to Jason and I as owners and our employees, part of our profit sharing plan. It's totally worth doing. Mm-hmm. This idea that costs don't matter is a very Silicon Valley way of thinking that I, again, understand at the scale of something maybe, but I also actually think it's aesthetically unpleasing. I find an inefficient business, as I find an inefficient program full of line noise, to just be a splinter in my brain. I hate looking at an expense report and just seeing disproportionate waste. And when I was looking at our spend at 37 Signals a few years back, I saw bills that did not pass my smell test. I remembered how much we used to spend on infrastructure before the cloud, and I saw numbers I could not recognize in proportion to what we needed. The fact that computers have gotten so much faster over time, shouldn't things be getting cheaper? Why are we spending more and more money servicing more customers? Yes, but with much faster computers, Moore's law should be lowering the costs. And the opposite is happening. Why is that happening? And that started a journey of unwinding why the cloud isn't as great as a deal as people like to think that it is.
Yeah, can we look at the specifics just for people who don't know the story, and then generalize to what it means about the role of the cloud in the tech business? So the specifics is you were using AWS S3?
We were using AWS for everything.
Okay.
Hey.com launched as an entirely cloud app. It was completely on AWS for compute, for databases, for all of it. We were using all the systems as they're best prescribed that we should. Our total cloud bill for Basecamp, our total spend with AWS was, I think, $3.2 million or $3.4 million at its peak. That's kind of a lot of money. $3.4 million. I mean, we have a ton of users and customers, but still, that just struck me as unreasonable. And the reason why it was so unreasonable was because I had the pitch for the cloud ringing in my ears. Hey, this is going to be faster. This is going to be easier. This is going to be cheaper. Why are you trying to produce your own power? Like, do you have your own power plant? Why would you do that? Leave the computers to the hyperscalers. They're much better at it anyway. I actually thought that was a compelling pitch. I bought in on that pitch for several years and thought, do you know what? I'm done ever owning a server again. We're just going to rent our capacity, and Amazon is going to be able to offer us services much cheaper than we could buy them themselves because they're going to have these economies of scale. And I was thinking, Jeff's word ringing, my competitor's margin is my opportunity. That was something he used to drive Amazon.com with. That if he could just make 2% when the other guy was trying to make 4%, he would end up with all the money. And on volume, he would still win. So I thought that was the operating ethos for AWS. It turns out that's not true at all. AWS, by the way, operates at almost 40% margin. So just in that, there's a clue that competitors are not able to do the competitive thing we like about capitalism, which is to lower costs and so forth. So the cloud pitch, in my optics, is fundamentally false. It did not get easier, first of all. I don't know if you've used AWS recently. It is hella complicated. If you think Linux is hard, you've never tried to set up IAM rules or access parameters or whatever for AWS.
AWS was always difficult. It was always clunky.
Well, I think it's gotten even more difficult. But yes, now, some of that is it's difficult because it's very capable and you have a bunch of capacity on tap. And there are reasons. I don't think they're good enough to justify how complicated the whole jingamajing has become. But what's certainly true is that it's no longer easier. It's not easier to use AWS than it is to run your own machines, which we learned when we pulled out of the cloud and didn't hire a single extra person. Even though we operate all our own hardware, the team stayed exactly the same. So you have this three-way pitch, right? It's going to be easier. It's going to be cheaper. It certainly wasn't cheaper. We've just proved that by cutting our spend on infrastructure by half to 2/3. And it's going to be faster. The last bit was true. But way too many people overestimated the value of that speed. If you need 1,000 computers online in the next 15 minutes, nothing beats the cloud. How would you even procure that? If we just need another 20 servers, it's going to take a week or two to get boxes shipped on pallets, delivered to a data center and unwrapped and racked and all that stuff, right? But how often do we need to do that? And how often do we need to do that if buying those servers is way, way cheaper, such that we get vastly more compute for the same amount of money? Could we just buy more servers and not even care about the fact that we're not hyper-optimized on the compute utility, that we don't have to use things like automatic scaling to figure things out because we have to reduce costs? Yes, we can. So we went through this journey over a realization in early 2023 when I had finally had enough with our bills. I wanted to get rid of them. I wanted to spend less money. I wanted to keep more of the money ourselves. And in just over 6 months, we moved 7 major applications out of the cloud in terms of compute, caching, databases, the works onto our own servers, a glorious, beautiful new fleet bought from the king of servers, Michael Dell, who really, by the way, is another icon of mine. I saw he just celebrated 41 years in business. 41 years. This man has been selling awesome servers that we've been using for our entire existence. But anyway, these pallets arrive in a couple of weeks, and we rack them up and get everything going, and we were out. At least with the compute part. We then had a long multi-year commitment to S3 because the only way to get decent pricing in the cloud, by the way, is not to buy on a day-to-day basis, not to rent on a database basis, but to bind yourself up to multi-year contracts. With compute, it's often a year. That was in our case. And with storage, it was 4 years. We signed a 4-year contract to store our petabytes of customer files in the cloud to be able to get something just halfway decent affordable. So all of these projects came together to the sense that we're now saving literally millions of dollars, projected about 10 million over 5 years. It's always hard. How do you do the accounting exactly? And TOC, this, that, and the other thing. But it's millions of dollars. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that getting out of the cloud meant returning to more of an original idea of the internet. That the internet was not designed such that 3 computers should run everything. It was a distributed network such that the individual nodes could disappear and the whole thing would still carry on. DARPA designed this such that the Russians could take out Washington and they could still fight back from New York. That the entire communication infrastructure wouldn't disappear because there was no hub and spoke. It was a network. I always found that an immensely beautiful vision. That you could have this glorious internet and no single node was in control of everything. And we've returned to much more of a single node controlling everything idea with these hyperscalers. When US East 1, the main and original region for AWS, goes offline, which has happened more than a few times over the years, seemingly a third of the internet is offline. Like that in itself is just an insult to DARPA's design. It doesn't detract from the fact that what AWS built was marvelous. I think the cloud has moved so many things so far forward, especially around virtualization, automation, setup. It's all those giant leaps forward for system administration that's allowing us now to be able to run things on-prem in a way that smells and feels much like the cloud, just at half the cost or less. And with the autonomy and the satisfaction of owning hardware. I don't know what the last time you looked at like an actual server and took it apart and looked inside of. These things are gorgeous. I mean, I posted a couple of pictures of our racks out in the data center, and people always go crazy for them because we've gotten so abstracted from what the underlying metal looks like in this cloud age that most people have no idea. They have no idea how powerful a modern CPU is. They have no idea how much RAM you can fit into a 1U rack. Progress in computing has been really exciting, especially I'd say in the last 4 to 5 years after TSMC, with Apple's help, really pushed the envelope. I mean, we kind of sat still there for a while Intel was spinning their wheels going nowhere. And then TSMC, with Apple propelling them, really moved things forward. And now servers are exciting again. Like you're getting jumps year over year in the 15-20% rather than the single digit we were stuck with for a while. And that all means that owning your own hardware is a more feasible proposition than it's ever been, that you need fewer machines to run ever more, and that more people should do it. Because as much as I love Jeff and Amazon, like he doesn't need another, 40% margin on all the tech stuff that I buy to run our business. And this is just something I've been focused on, both because of the ideology around honoring DARPA's original design, the practicality of running our own hardware, seeing how fast we can push things with the latest machines, and then saving the money. And that has all been so enjoyable to do, but also so counterintuitive for a lot of people, because it seemed, I think, for a lot of people in the industry that like we'd all decided that we were done buying computers, that was something we would just delegate to AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, that we didn't have to own these things anymore. So I think there's a little bit of whiplash for some people that, I thought we agreed. We were done with that. And then along come us and say, do you know what? Maybe you should have a computer.
Is there some pain points to running your own servers?
Oh, plenty. There's pain points to operating computers of all kind. Have you tried just like using a personal computer these days? Half the time when my kids or my wife have a problem, I go like, have you tried turning it just off and on again? Computers are inherently painful to humans. Owning your own computer, though, kind of makes some of that pain worth it. There's a responsibility that comes with actually owning the hardware that, to me, at least, make the burden of operating that hardware seem slightly more enjoyable. Now, there are things you have to learn, certainly at our scale, too. I mean, we're not just buying a single computer and plugging it into an Ethernet. We have to have racks and racks of them, and you got to set it up with network cabling, and there is some specialized expertise in that. But it's not like that expertise is like building nuclear rockets. It's not like it's not widely distributed. Literally, the entire internet was built on people knowing how to plug in a computer to the internet, right? Oh, Ethernet cable goes here, power cable goes here, let's boot up Linux. That's how everyone put anything online until 10, 12 years ago when the cloud sort of took over. So the expertise is there and can be rediscovered. You too can learn how to operate a Linux computer.
Yeah, and it's, when you get a bunch of them, there's a bunch of flashing LEDs, and it's just so exciting.
Beautiful, calming, amazing. Computers are really fun. This is actually something I've gotten into even deeper after we moved out of the cloud. Now, my next kind of tingle is that if you could move out of the cloud, can you also move out of the data center? Personal servers have gotten really scarily quick and efficient, and personal internet connections rival what we connected data centers with just a decade or two ago. So there's a whole community around this concept of homelabbing, which is essentially installing server hardware in your own apartment, connecting it to the internet, and exposing that directly to the internet. That harks back to those glorious days of the 90s when people building for the internet would host the actual website on their actual computer in the closet. And I'm pretty fired up about that. I'm doing a bunch of experiments. I've ordered a bunch of home servers for my own apartment. I marvel at the fact that I can get a 5 gigabit fiber connection now. I think, do you know what? 5 gigabit, that could have taken Basecamp to multiple millions of MRR in the way that back then I ran the whole business on a single box with 2004 technology and probably 100 megabit cable. Like the capacity we have access to, both in terms of compute and connectivity, is something that people haven't readjusted to. And this happens sometimes in technology where progress sneaks up on you. This happened with SSDs. I love that, by the way. We designed so much of our technology and storage approach and database design around spinning metal disks that had certain seek rate properties. And then we went to NVMe and SSDs, and it took quite a while for people to realize that the systems had to be built fundamentally different now, that the difference between memory and disk was now far smaller when you weren't spinning these metal plates around with a little head that had to read off them. You were essentially just dealing with another type of memory. I think we're a little bit in that same phase when it comes to the capacity of new businesses to be launched literally out of your damn bedroom.
So you can get pretty far with a large user base with Homelabbing.
Absolutely.
That's exciting. That's like the old school. That's really exciting.
It's
right?
bringing back the startup in the garage in the literal physical sense of the word. Now, some of that is, do we need to? You can get relatively cheap cloud capacity if you don't need very much.
Hell yes, we need to. I mean, the feeling of doing that by yourself, of seeing the LED lights in your own home. I mean, there's nothing like that.
There's just an aesthetic to it that I am completely in love with and I want to try to push on. Now, is that going to be the same thing as getting out of the cloud? I'm not sure. Our exit out of the cloud was not the exit out of the data center. We basically just bought hardware, shipped it to a professionally managed data center that we didn't even actually touch. This is the other misconception people have about moving out of the cloud, that we have a bunch of people who are constantly driving to a data center somewhere to rack new boxes and change dead RAM. That's not how things happen in the modern world at all. We have a company called Summit, previously Deft, that is what we call white gloves. They work in the data center. When we need something like, hey, Deft, can you go down and swap the dead SSD in box number 6? They do it. And what we see is akin to what someone working with the cloud would see. You see IP addresses coming online. You see drives coming online. It's not that different, but it is a whole heck of a lot cheaper when you are operating at our scale. And of course it is. Of course it's cheaper to own things if you need those things for years rather than it is to rent it. In no other domain would we confuse those two things, that it's cheaper to own for the long duration than it is to rent.
There is some gray area. Like I've gotten a chance to interact with the XAI team a bunch. I'm probably going back out there in Memphis to do a big podcast associated with the Grok release. And those folks, in order to achieve the speed of building up the cluster and to solve some of the novel aspects that have to do with the GPU, with the training, they have to be a little bit more hands-on. It's a little less white glove.
Oh, and I love that, right? They're dealing with a frontier problem, and they're dealing with it not by renting a bunch of GPUs at a huge markup from their main competitor. They're going like, no, screw that. We're going to put 100,000 GPUs in our own tents, right? And build it in absolute record time. So I think, if anything, this is testament to the idea that owning hardware can give you an advantage, both at the small scale, at the medium scale, and at the pioneer levels of computing.